Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the CSA's virtual town hall on the college recruiting process. We're thrilled to have prospective student athletes, parents, and coaches here with us today. My name is Lovey Roundtree, Director of Expansion at the CSA and moderator for our town hall. Navigating the college squash recruiting process can feel overwhelming. Our goal for the next hour is to provide clear information, share practical advice, and answer your most pressing questions. We've assembled a fantastic panel of leaders in the college squash community who bring experience from different levels of the sport that we all love. To start off, Harry Smith, CSA Commissioner, who oversees all of the CSA championships and rankings and brings key insight into regulations and procedures, will introduce himself and give a little information before we introduce the panel of coaches. Harry, please take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Lovey, and thanks everyone for taking the time tonight. I do also want to be upfront. We are having a few technical difficulties in terms of inviting some of the coaches in as presenters, but we're hoping to sort through that. But again, my name is Harry Smith, and I'm the commissioner of the College Squash Association. So I personally went through this process myself as a junior squash player. I played through the circuit. I ended up playing college squash at Colby College, where I graduated in 2012. And from there, I began my career in the squash world, starting with US Squash, where I spent 11 years running the junior squash programs, including tournaments, rankings, and policies. In September 2023, I became the interim commissioner of the College Squash Association, and I'm now entering my third season leading the CSA. I personally believe that college squash is probably the most exciting product in our sport. With squash as a game that we all love, but when you add that team component to it and energy around college matches, it becomes something truly special. And it's generally an experience that I would say most college athletes, when they look back and reflect on their overall experience at college, they'd classify as one of the most rewarding components of their overall experience. So we're going to dig through a bunch of the recruiting tips and tricks and answer some of the most burning questions that you've all submitted this evening. Hoping that the three other coaches are able to join us. But again, we're incredibly excited and appreciative that you've taken the time to join us on a Thursday evening leading into Labor Day. And we're looking forward to getting to know you all better and to better explain the process of being recruited into the ranks of a college squash player. Back to you, Lovey.
Thank you, Harry. To start us off, I'm going to introduce Sean Wilkinson, who's the men's head coach at Princeton University, and he's going to be representing the Ivy League and Division I perspective. Just as a reminder, during the conversations that we have today, I'm going to ask that the questions be geared towards the general recruiting process rather than specific questions geared at individual coaches and their institutions. So Sean, go ahead and I'll have you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the recruiting process in your eyes.
Thanks, Lovey. Sean Wilkinson. I'm the men's head squash coach at Princeton, now entering my 13th season already, which has gone by really, really quickly. Great to be here. I've done these before. I served on the CSA board for a number of years, especially during the transition from being independent to falling under the US Squash umbrella. And so it's great to see that we're finally here with so many organizations kind of all coming together to promote college squash. And as Harry said, I do believe that college squash is the most exciting squash product in the world. The rivalries never die. They're always there. They're fantastic. And they are, from all over the spectrum, from Division III schools to new schools popping up. Then, of course, the Ivy League, which goes back, long. I think we're about to enter our 100th year as a program. And so they've been around for a long time. And I'm excited to help you navigate what I hope isn't, too much of a scary process for you and your children.
Thanks, Sean. So technology is technology, and we're just having a couple of difficulties, but to let you know, we do have Aaron Robson, the head coach at Hamilton, Busani Zaba, the head coach at Amherst, and Luke Forrester, who is the assistant coach at Drexel University, waiting in the queue. And as soon as we're able to bring them on board, we'll go ahead and do that. In the interim, I'll just give you a little briefing on the format for today's town hall, and it'll include a discussion surrounding topics such as understanding the recruiting calendar and deadlines, best practices for communicating with college coaches, and specifically for students, players communicating with college coaches, parents, there's a whole section for you in terms of how you can be supportive. The role of rankings and ratings and tournaments and what part they play in the entire process, and also what college coaches are really looking for in addition to what the admissions offices are looking for, because that can be a little bit different in terms of what do you like as a player versus what do you like as an academic student. As I mentioned before, questions should be geared towards the overall recruiting process. If you have not had a chance to submit a question prior, there is a chat function and you can go ahead and submit your question there, and we'll make sure that that's added to the queue at the end of our discussion. Following that, we will open up the Q&A session to everyone, where our panel will address specific questions that have been raised either prior or in the chat section. So with that, I'm going to transfer it over to Harry, who's going to give a little briefing about all of the things that I just mentioned, and then we'll go into the Q&A session. Okay, Harry, you ready?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lovey. And thanks everyone again for taking the time to join the call. So as Lovey said, I'm going to start with just a general precursor of the CSA and the league, and then kind of go into a little bit more of the specifics of the college squash recruiting process, and then we'll open it up into hopefully more of a panel discussion than just Sean, but Sean would be a great resource and be able to answer any of your burning questions. So starting with who the CSA is. So the CSA is the governing body of intercollegiate squash in the United States. We govern and oversee all of our varsity programs. We are the rules and regulations. We set that for all competition. The CSA has had quite an evolution. I believe the very first intercollegiate match was played in 1923. From there, it evolved into a men's organization and then a women's organization. In 2017, those two organizations merged, and then in 2023, we further consolidated under U.S. Squash's umbrella as a subsidiary. But ultimately, our mission is, and our focus is every single day, is to continue to grow the footprint of college squash into different areas and colleges across the country, to promote and uphold the values of sportsmanship and integrity, and to pursue academic excellence for all of our student athletes. Moving on. So I just wanted to quickly summarize our current list of varsity programs that we have, or that sponsor varsity teams. On the men's side, we have 34 varsity programs. On the women's side, we have 31. Again, hoping that number will continue to expand. Something that's really unique about college squash is that it is multi-divisional. So we have Division I programs such as a UVA or a Drexel or a Fordham that's competing against D3 schools such as a Colby College, Williams, Amherst, Bard, Dickinson, Denison. And it's also across the various conferences. So every Ivy League college, with the exception of Brown, has a varsity program. Every single NESCAC school has a varsity program. And then there's a number of other schools across the Liberty League and a couple independents as well. But again, it's an impressive list of colleges, all incredibly academically rigorous, and ultimately a fantastic place for students to explore and pursue a varsity sport as a squash athlete while pursuing their academics as well. So in terms of the overall varsity squash experience, the main purpose of this call is recruiting, but there were a number of questions about what it means to be a varsity athlete, a squash athlete, what the season looks like. So I just wanted to provide this context. So the season ultimately begins in mid to late October. Again, because it is multi-divisional and it is across multiple conferences, there are slight differences when the official start date is, but for the most part, the second players arrive on campus now. They'll begin either captain's practices or they'll be limited by the number of hours that they can actually have official practices with the teams. But all varsity programs can officially begin practice as of mid-October. So I think this year the last teams to start that would be October 22nd, with official matches beginning at the latest on November 15th. The season then runs from, let's say, the beginning of November up until mid-March. The bulk of that season does come from really in January onwards. There's a lot of activity before the winter holidays. But once we're back in January, it's just a little bit disjointed before then. So we have some Thanksgiving break, winter break, but then once we get back in January, there is a lot of squash to be played in a short period of time. Most teams will play between 10 and 20 matches over the course of the season. Each individual team is made up between 9 and 15 players on the roster, with the head-to-head matches being between the top 9. And then ultimately, as a college squash athlete, as a varsity athlete, there's always the question of how do you balance your time between your academic commitments and your athletic commitments. And I got to say, our athletes are incredibly impressive. They're high achieving in the classroom, and they're as strong of an athlete as you're going to see in any sport. So then moving on to college squash specifically, as many of you on this call are likely fully into the junior squash circuit. And I have to say that college squash is a completely different and a positive adjustment from junior squash, where it's quite a grind. The intensity level is incredibly high. You're playing for yourself and just competing against your peers, as opposed to once you get to college, you're now surrounded by a team. It gives you an immediate home and community and group of people to spend your time with, to study with, to train with. And it really is a different environment where you're now supporting your teammate as opposed to just playing for yourself. And again, I mentioned this in my intro, it really is a fantastic product. The intensity, the rivalries, it's something that everyone in the squash world really would enjoy. But ultimately, there's always this question of, am I good enough to play in college squash? And the short answer is yes. As I said, each team is comprised of 9-player rosters, and coaches are actively recruiting for all 9 positions. Not every single person who is recruited to a team is expected to be a standout number one complete game changer for the school. Every single position, another important and unique piece about the college squash experience is the number 1 match and the number 9 match are both equal to 1 point. And the team that wins five points first wins the match. So no matter where you are on your team's roster, you're playing a meaningful and important part, and the team needs you. So everyone is important, and all programs have slightly different levels or thresholds that they're looking for, but ultimately for anyone that's looking to play college squash, there's an opportunity for you. And then moving on to September 2nd. So this is, from a recruiting standpoint, effectively the most important date. I'm not saying that the process necessarily begins on September 2nd, but this is the first time that a prospective student athlete in their junior year of high school can actually begin to have official conversations with college coaches about recruiting, about playing squash at their program, about what it means to be a member of their team, and the expectations there. So this is an incredibly important date, and I would say a fairly common question that we did receive leading into this town hall was about coach communication, and timelines about when you can start that process, when coaches can be reaching out to you and responding to your emails. And if you have not been hearing back from coaches, this is a large reason why, is they cannot officially actually speak with you about recruiting until this date comes. So next Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, is the official start to the recruiting calendar. So once we hit September 2nd, what does this mean? It means a lot. Effectively, a lot can happen very quickly. You go from being in a state where you are not allowed to be having direct conversations, or I'll say coaches aren't allowed to be directly having conversations with you, to now you can reach out to coaches. You can say, I want to, I'm really into your team. I'm excited about the prospect, and I would love to talk to you about how I can join your team as a player and a recruited athlete. And there's a whole lot that goes into this. So ultimately, you're going to be reaching out to coaches. Coaches are going to be reaching out to you. In some cases, you're going to be managing multiple conversations simultaneously with different programs. You're going to be having conversations about when to visit the campus to experience the overall school, spend some time with the team, have more one-on-one time with the coaches. Coaches are going to be asking you about your academic profiles. This is a huge and important part of the process, is your academics, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But ultimately, they're going to be trying to figure out if you are a good fit for what they're looking for. There's the squash component, but there's also the academic component as well, which is incredibly important. So going down that vein, we always say that squash gets you noticed by coaches and can be a starting point to these conversations, but ultimately your grades get you into school. And we're definitely going to touch on this in some of the panel conversations after this short presentation. But ultimately, each school has, an important takeaway is each school has slightly different expectations and standards for academics and squash. So it's important to get an understanding of what those thresholds are and where you stack up for each of these schools. And by, academics being everything, squash, again, will get you noticed. It will get you to have that conversation. But ultimately, through your entire high school career, you're going to want to be building your squash resume or your recruit resume, your profile, which includes academics, as there are several components of this journey, starting with a pre-read. And that is effectively when the admissions office will ultimately review prospective student athletes' academic credentials and be able to, with a good amount of certainty, be able to make an assessment as to whether or not they are likely to get in based on their academics. There's important terms such as a verbal offer or a commitment. This is through the conversations that you're having with college coaches, where they effectively tell you as a prospective student athlete that you are the person that they would like to be recruiting, that they're going to be applying or assisting in the admissions office and kind of helping to navigate that process. But ultimately, up until the point that in a formal letter of admission has been received from the Office of Admissions, there's a lot to go here. And again, we'll definitely touch on that as we go into the question and answers with our panelists. And ultimately, what are coaches looking for? So there's the academic credentials, there's the squash performance and rankings. A massive piece, a major piece is you as a person. They need to make sure that you fit with their team. whether or not it's a good 4-year fit for you. Does the school offer the academic curriculum that most interests you? This is a 4-year commitment. So want to make sure that all parties are interested in the school and are going to be happy, because ultimately there are a lot of squash programs, a lot of colleges that offer varsity squash. They all have their slight unique takes, which could make or break the overall college experience. Coaches want players that are go-getters, that are going to be taking the initiative, that are clear communicators through this process, and ultimately are willing to be coached and improve. And to that effect, also act as a good team player. As I've harped on multiple times, is the fact that college squash is special because you are with a team. It's an individual sport where you are playing for your teammates, for your school. So they're wanting players who are ready to jump in and help the team and put the team first. So a few key takeaways here before we jump into a question and answer. One is that every college is different. Coaches are looking for different people. Coaches have different number of recruiting positions available. And therefore, just because one school or one coach says one thing does not mean that that necessarily applies to another. You should research every step of the process. So part of that research is identifying the schools. So we do have a list of the varsity programs on our website. Each school has different offerings. So does the academic curriculum interest you? Do the different schools at the college or university excite you? And asking questions. So staying positive. This is a huge piece. It's a long journey. The recruiting process, it starts on September 2nd of your junior year, but offer letters and admissions aren't finalized until November, December, January, up until March of your senior year of high school. So from the moment where you're first having conversations with coaches to a formal letter of acceptance, it could be 18 months or more. And there's lots of bumps along the road, but your job is to stay positive through the process and trust in the process. If you're honest with the coaches, they're going to give you a realistic and honest assessment about where you stand in their pool of recruits and about their level of interest with you. And a massive actionable tip that I constantly am hearing from all the coaches is being findable. So this means update your Club Locker profile. They need a way to contact you. So that means up-to-date email addresses, up-to-date high school graduation year. The high school graduation year is incredibly important because, again, coaches can't speak to you until September 2nd of your junior year. If you have bad information on your profile, there could be inadvertent or accidental bad contacts, which can result in basically, for no fault of the coaches, no fault of yours, there might be a delay to when they can actually begin a recruiting conversation with you. So rather than September 2nd, it might be pushed a month. So it's important to have this information. Also, the players, the prospective student athletes should be the ones leading this process. Parents are there to help, to support, but ultimately the coaches want to be interacting with the players. They want to have conversations with the players to gauge their level of interest, what type of player they are, what type of person they are. And as supportive as parents can be, every once in a while, they could cross a line to hinder that process between the coach and the players. So, I would say unanimously, coaches, their general preference and the best recruits they have, the experiences of recruiting athletes that they look back on with the most level of success are the student athletes that are managing that process and leading that process and being the point of contact with the coaches. And lastly, just asking questions. Curiosity is fantastic. It really shows when a student athlete is excited about the process. It can be daunting. There's a lot that goes into it. it feels competitive because your peers, your competitors are having the same conversations with coaches at teams that you want to attend. And ultimately staying positive, asking questions. It's a really good pathway to kind of establishing a relationship with these coaches who want that. They want to build a relationship before they're comfortable and able to formally offer their support to your application. Sorry. So with that, I want to hand it back off to Lovey before we jump in, and I'm not sure if we were able to pull any of our other panelists back in, but hopefully there was some news on that.
Yep. Thank you, Harry. And thank you all for sitting in on the presentation section. So what we're going to do is transition now into a bit of Q&A, and we'll split that up between the three of us. So Harry, myself, and Sean will be responding to questions that we have in the pre-submitted questionnaire, and then those questions that have been submitted since then. What we will do are the coaches who weren't able to hop on for technological reasons, Busani, Luke, and Aaron, they will offer responses to some of the other questions in another forum that will add on to some of the videos that Harry has been sharing recently on the college recruiting process. So keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, we'll go ahead and switch gears. And Harry, would you like to present the first question for Sean to answer?
Definitely. And before going into that, just the panel, I do also want to say I think that the turnout's been tremendous. As of the time of this call, we had over 350 junior players, parents, and coaches who had signed up for this recruiting town hall, which just goes to show how much of an appetite there is and how much excitement there is and curiosity around the recruiting process. And one of our top priorities is to demystify the process, to better equip all of you with the tools and the information to help you navigate this process, to try to remove the stress where possible. Not saying we can do it entirely, but information is power. So the more information you have to understand what an offer means, what the process is of going from offer to an acceptance, all this stuff is hugely helpful as you navigate this process. And from the 350, we received over 65 written in questions ahead of time. And ultimately, they kind of boiled down into a few general topics. One is general information about the CSA and the overall college squash experience. One is about the recruiting process itself. So how does it work? What are the timelines? And some just generally specific questions that families are facing. And then questions about communicating with coaches, recruitability, so like criteria that coaches are looking for and their eligibility, or what type of evaluations that coaches are doing. So to Lovey's point right there is we will certainly be taking all of these questions, and it might not necessarily be this evening, but over the coming days and weeks, we'll continue to answer any questions that we feel it needs to be answered, and that is a common question. So with that, I would say far and away, John's on the hot seat now as the
stuck with me.
Yeah. So far and away, the most common question that we received was about the role that ratings and rankings play in the recruiting process. So wanted to know, Sean, if you can start us off, and are you simply looking for the highest rated players? Or is there opportunity for players with lower ratings to be recruited as well? Kind of where are you drawing your line or establishing your criteria?
Yeah, I think that's become a new trend, unfortunately, in college squash, as ratings and kind of become more and more popular around the world. So it's a long answer, unfortunately, and it's a little bit nuanced. I think in general across the league, and I talk to all the coaches all the time, I think the rating is just a guide, and I think the ranking is just a guide. Obviously, it does show a good body of work, and so it gives all of us a pretty good understanding of where you are in terms of your peers for that specific year. And years vary, every year is different. Some years are stronger, some years are weaker. And so oftentimes, some parents will say, but this person is, ranked higher than the person you recruited last year. Well, it doesn't always quite work that way. And so what we try and do, I think, and I think this is in general, is just figure out how much someone's going to develop in college way more than what their current rating is. Obviously, there are some outliers there where there are kids who've been, really good on the international stage, and those are kind of the obvious recruits. And then it becomes a little more nuanced once you get past that. And again, that's very different throughout the league. It's not always the same at NESCAC. It's not always the same at all the Ivies. Certainly some of the other Division I schools as well. So it's just a guide, I think, in the most part. And then from there, we're just trying to see how much do you have left in the tank to develop as a college squash player, because as you mentioned, Harry, it's much more intense. You're now playing on a team, so we have to try and evaluate how you're going to adjust to team life, how you're going to adjust to life being away from your parents, how you're going to adjust to kind of the methods that we put in place for you, how you can handle the academics at all these very high academic institutions. And so it's not just about a rating. I don't think I've ever recruited a kid just simply based on on rating. And I'm not sure another coach in the league has done that either. Like I said, there are some obvious, cases where kids have won a British Open or, done really well at the World Juniors. And, but even then, I don't know if I could tell you what those ratings are. I just know that they're very good squash players. So yeah, it's just a guide. I do think one of the nuances there is I would look at all of the college squash website has got a good page where you can click on everyone's squad and you can see the ratings in there. And so I think for everyone it's a good idea just to be a little realistic and go and look at some of those ratings, and they'll give you a rough guide of where you may fit into the league in general. But no, it's not something that I sit in my office, and I don't think any coach does, and just kind of sort by rating for sure.
Got it. Thanks, Sean. And Lovey, feel free to jump in if you have specific follow-ups. Yeah.
So in the interim, I'm also going to try my best to answer some of the questions that are in the Q&A section, but, just by responding in there in case we run out of time. One of the questions that was posed is about any future schools or programs that could be potentially added to the roster. And that is why I am here. So my job is actually to bring on newer programs, bring on more colleges and universities into the squash, the CSA's network. So we're looking at West Coast, Southern, Houston, Midwest to really add a lot more depth and options to our players because, the junior circuit is quite robust and talented, and we need more schools to accommodate that group. So to quickly answer that, yes, we are working on it, and the hopes is that in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll have a lot more options for our junior players. And right now, I'll just go back and sort of answer some of the questions that are relatively easy to answer and, by typing them out, and then I'll just hand it over to you, Harry.
Thanks, Lovey. All right, Sean, another question is that we often saw a lot of questions about the recruiting process. So from your perspective, the first day that official recruiting conversations can take place is September 2nd this year of a prospective student athlete's junior year. So leading up to that point, what are you as a coach kind of doing to prepare for that moment without giving away any Princeton secrets?
Not allowed to give away any Princeton secrets. I think, Alan and I think in general, the other coaches are just looking out to see who's coming down the pipeline. We're not just going to, the tournaments and looking at, who's in the current cycle. We're looking ahead for sure. Again, we're all looking to see what that ceiling is. Can we improve a player when they get on campus? How they're going to fit into the team. And so for us, the preparation happens well in advance of that September 2nd, your junior year. And I know that's the case, to everyone that I, that I speak with in the coaching ranks. And then we're looking, maybe we're kind of watching some body language on court. We're looking at some behavior. I'm just looking at how, your parents and you interact with referees in high pressure situations. What does that moment look like for you on court? When it's 8-all in the 5th and you may get a no let and you think it's a stroke. So we're looking at all of those things. And then, then we're trying to just gather some more information as much as we can from people that we know in your area. You may come to summer camp in your freshman or sophomore year, which is always helpful. I think there's a question somewhere out there about that. I do think that's a helpful thing for us to do. We get to know you in a very personal, intimate situation, which I think is always good. And then just getting ready for the actual day is, we're just preparing emails. We're gathering information. I will say what Harry said earlier about making sure your profiles are accurate on US squash, I do think is very, very important, especially your high school graduation year. Harry in US squash send us a list of all kind of the junior players, and sometimes those graduation years are incorrect, and that can be frustrating. But in general, we do know who's coming up in every year, but just make sure that those are accurate. And then we just try and schedule phone calls once that time comes along, and that could be email, text. We try and meet the athlete where they are. If they're, I know the generation currently is very, emails, I don't know, I'm getting very many anymore, but my phone definitely gets a ton of text messages. And so, we're just trying to meet everyone where they are. I mean, we even do some of Instagram remarkably. So just really where you guys are, we'll meet you. And then from there, just, kind of a cascade effect through the fall.
Great, thanks. And then a quick follow-up. So when do coaches start to really take notice of players? Like, what's the youngest age group that you'll first be like, oh, that's someone that I'm going to, write their name down and, start to track them as they're progressing through the junior circuit? Like, are we looking at the winners of the, the JCT at the under 13s, under 11s, or are we waiting a little bit longer?
I'm laughing because I love getting the resume that's like I won, boys under 9, Rochester Open or something. No, I mean, look, we're in the building at all these tournaments, and so we're around and we're looking, and it's always fun to kind of watch, which kids run on court in between games and have a passion for the sport. So we're aware of everyone from a young age, but does that mean that I'm paying attention to predicting whether I think they're going to be, a world-class squash player? I'm not sure we're doing that quite at that young age, but we're taking, we're definitely taking notice. Under 15s is an important year because that kind of coincides with that junior, sophomore year and occasion for some kids. Sometimes it's under 17, that kind of, down year, up year situation that happens there. And look, people develop at different ages, and I try, we have run a pretty decent junior program, and I try and tell everyone the same thing, just because your nemesis is really good at under 15s and, you're still catching up, doesn't mean that won't change. And everyone goes through kind of the biological changes at different ages. And so I just try and encourage everyone, and I know everyone else does, don't panic. You don't need to be the best player in, under 13. And if you are, that's great too. Just, make sure that you keep it up throughout the different levels of junior squash. But no, I mean, look, we can't really do very much until junior year, right? We can take notice, but there's not a whole lot we can do about it until they are in their junior year.
Yeah. And just because you just kind of touch on a little bit about keeping up the trajectory, is that something that you see from a burnout standpoint, something that you have seen as a coach, kind of going through that process of talented player, but are overdoing it either in the number of tournaments they're playing, the amount of hours they're putting in, and just kind of solely focusing on squash? And do you, as a coach, like to see some type of balance between their non-squash extracurriculars with their squash?
It's a good question. I mean, burnout's something that all of us pay very, very close attention to. You want someone who's not only going to develop there, but is really committed to 4 years in college. I think as, the parents on this call know, those support opportunities, they're very limited relatively to, to the size of the junior squash world. And so, we are very careful about how we approach that issue of burnout. And we try and dig in, whether it's, with coaches or, just watching. You can tell from body language if someone's really into it or not. Injury record's really important. Multi-sport athletes, thing that all of us look at, are you doing multiple things, just to try and reduce some of that injury probability that may happen later on. But everyone's specializing so young now, it's hard to really come across a multi-sport athlete anymore, but it's definitely something that we used to look at for sure. And so it's hard to know. It's a gut instinct, and we're just trying to see, can they develop? And some of that is, if they're burned out, the development's not going to happen when they step on campus. And I think there's numerous examples of kids that were really, really good in juniors, and for one reason or another, and it's not just burnout, it could be various other reasons that happen once you get to college, just didn't quite develop the way that people predicted them they would. But it's, you got to have a passion for it. If you don't have a passion for it, we can see it a mile away. And it's not, it's obvious. It's really obvious.
Yep. And then just quickly, I saw this one. I'll in if and when I get it wrong. But the question was, is NESCAC recruiting schedule the same as D1 schools, since different in NCAA? So college squash is not an NCAA sport. All colleges are expected and need to follow their school's NCAA divisional bylaws and rules. That said, College Squash Association, we set effectively, it's the recruiting start date. So that's the September 2nd of a prospective student athlete's junior year in high school. So that's when conversations can start. That applies to D1 schools. That applies to Ivy D1, non-Ivy D1, NESCAC D3, other D3s. And the variability would be in terms of kind of how the recruiting process evolves, when coaches can make offers, when the schools can do a pre-read. My understanding is that for most NESCACs, coaches might start talking to players or will start talking to players starting on September 2nd. But from September 2nd until the end of their junior year, they're just building relationship, trying to understand if the player is going to be a good fit, if the player wants to come to their college, kind of tracking just building that relationship. And then the NESCAC admissions office, they won't actually look at an academic pre-read until roughly July, after the junior year. So that means once that comes through, coaches will be in a better position to be able to make verbal offers, commit to you as a recruited athlete. But so that's a little bit different. Sean, maybe from an Ivy standpoint, can you talk through what that process looks like?
Sure. It's the same in the Ivy League. We can start talking to players in September 2nd of their junior year, but the pre-read won't occur until July 1st between their junior and senior years, and that's an Ivy mandate across the board. And I know it's the same in NESCAC as well. It's that same kind of time frame. And so you kind of live in this weird world where you may be getting an offer before you've had a pre-read. And generally, I think most of the coaches got a pretty good idea of who, what the academic requirements are at each institution. And so they can make a pretty good understanding. And that's why we do the pre-read, in July, so that if something doesn't go well in that pre-read, there's still opportunities for other places, And so the pre-read is an important part of that step.
Yeah. Okay. So next question is, one theme that has come up repeatedly is the interplay between academics and squash. And we were just kind of touching on this, but as a general rule, and something that we tend to communicate at the CSA is, and I said on this call, is that your squash gets you noticed by coaches, but your grades get you in. Can you touch on that from the standpoint of a coach and kind of how important the academics are? Can your squash get you into a college by itself, or do you need the full package of your academics as well?
Important to say this, college squash coaches do not make admissions decisions. They can support you in your admissions process, and we can guide you and we can help you make good decisions and get you to think about your essays correctly. But ultimately, that's an independent group on campus that's going to make all of the admissions decisions. And so, we're very careful about that in language, especially, at the Ivy League level. But your academics have to be strong. All of the college squash schools are high academic achieving schools, which is I think why there's so much interest in this. And our kids are all very, very well qualified across the league. And I can't give you specific details on what, I'm sure the next question, well, what GPA do I need to have and what SAT score do I need to have? And that will vary across the board. And so it's important that you have those discussions with whichever school you're interested in kind of pursuing and understanding more about. I will say it's highly competitive. And you have to do well, and especially that kind of 9th, 10th, 11th grade year, and you've got to make sure you're taking, and again, this is across the board, make sure you're taking core subjects, math, English, sciences, you're taking a language, all of those things are really important.
Thanks. And then that kind of goes into the next topic, something that you just mentioned, but basically, can you walk us through the process? So September 2nd happens, and as a coach, you start receiving communications from juniors. You reach out to some juniors and are having conversations. can you walk us through, this is kind of a two-part question, so I might need to remind you of the second part after you answer the first, but so you're having conversations with a player. You get to a point where you make a verbal offer or you're committing to the athlete. Kind of how does that process work? And then I guess the second piece is, once a student athlete has a verbal offer and they've verbally accepted it, what does the player need to make sure that they do to uphold, to ensure that they're kind of continuing and upholding their part of the deal? Because ultimately, your grades can't drop, your course load can't drop. They're like, basically any commitment is based on that moment in time. So can you shed some light on that kind of overall process from initiating those conversations to making an offer to the student actually getting the formal letter of admission?
A long process. So if you think about September 2nd of your junior year, in most instances, the early decision deadline for admission isn't until December of your senior year. So you've got all over a year, so call it a year and 3/4 months before you're actually getting any sort of admissions decisions from the admissions office. And then it's even longer if you end up in a regular decision cycle, which happens. And that's not uncommon by any stretch of the imagination. And so September 2nd, what we will all do is we will, set up some sort of phone call. And the first 2-3 weeks of September are crazy busy for all of us, trying to figure out who we like, and just setting up the calls, or even making some in-home visits for some of us. It's just a really busy time of year. And one of the key pieces in there, which Harry, has alluded to, is all of us are going to gather your 9th and 10th grade academic kind of transcripts and profiles. And they can be unofficial. You don't need to go to the registrar to get them. Any of that stuff is just what you get on, Blackboard or whatever reporting software your school uses is fine. And then the SATs, I think, that's kind of a piece of the puzzle that's up in the air right now is, which schools are requiring testing and which aren't. And so I think just having that in your back pocket, I think, is important at that date. And then based on that, we'll be able to figure out pretty quickly across the board how we build a class. And so building a class is really important. I know the NESCACs use a slightly different variable than the Ivy Leagues do, but we've got to build a class around getting, making sure that our academics for our entire class meets whatever our athletic departments require of us, and therefore, the admissions departments. And so what'll happen is, we'll talk to a bunch of people. We may offer some support in, whenever in that fall. Sometimes we go into January, February. It really just depends from year to year. I know that's probably another question. Well, when is the offer going to come? It really just depends. And there's normally some sort of domino effect that may happen. One school may offer a spot, and that kid may be off the table, and then someone else may offer a spot. And so it really just depends on how it all goes and how smoothly it goes. There's obviously some space for some visits in there in the fall as well. So it really, annually, it really varies. So once it's a coach will like a player, the player's academics look like they're in line. There's not much that'll happen after that until, that summer of your junior/senior year, where you're going into that year where now we'll need 3 years of transcripts. And so we'll probably look for something more official at that point. But, definitely a freshman, sophomore, junior year transcript. And then we will submit it for a pre-read in most cases. And if you have testing, fantastic. So, back to the testing thing quickly, you're going to have some time to make up more tests. We just want to, until that pre-read goes in, and even later, sometimes, we have kids that test in the fall of the application. Then the application will begin in your fall of your senior year. And so that's essays, teacher recommendations, making sure that your profile is strong. And then we will go through the cycle, and admissions takes over from there. They will do, some schools require interviews still. They may reach out to your school for more information on certain things, and you go into the real application process of all these schools, and it's robust. It's not, by any stretch of the imagination, you're just an athlete. You've got to make sure you write good essays, and you've got to make sure it's your best work and put your best foot forward. And then sometime in December, you will hear from the school. The Ivy League does something slightly different with like letters. I'm not going to overcomplicate it right now. But, in general, you get an early decision date in December, right before the US Open, ironically, every year. And then again, if you're in the regular decision cycle, that'll happen sometime in February or March, sometimes even April, depending on where you're applying. And so it's a really long process. And over that time, we get to know you pretty well. We get to know your families pretty well. Please get back to us pretty quickly in that time. If we need something, more information on something, there's always a delay. Was that both questions?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we are kind of coming up on that hour, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time and your time as the
I'm happy to go a bit longer if you want. I know technology killed us here, so happy to.
Yeah, but so this was I think a very topical question, especially with September 2nd right around the corner. But a lot of families and players have wanted to know kind of what's the best way for a student to express their interest? What's their best path for a first communication to start a relationship or a conversation? What are the types of pieces of information that you as a coach are looking for to kind of best help you in that process?
Yeah, I think the best piece of communication that I've seen are definitely ones that are concise, that are really straightforward. Hey, coach, my name is such and such. Maybe give you a brief rundown of what your rating and ranking are. We probably already have all that information. And then just express your interest. Go for it. Don't be shy to go for it. Really put your best foot forward in that email. Make sure that you're addressing the right coach. That happens a lot where there's a copy and paste situation. And I know we've all gotten them. We get emails addressed to various different coaches. That's not a great first look. It's certainly not, eliminating by any, of course not. But, just make sure that you're really paying attention to that. And, I know there's a lot going on in your lives. And so just take an extra minute there to make sure you get that right. But I also wouldn't make it too long. We're getting tons and tons of these, and we also have our regular kind of day-to-day things that are happening with our teams. And so although we prioritize recruiting in that time of year, we're also getting all of our student athletes back at the same time. So there's a lot going on. So certainly don't write 500 pages. And then, we'll schedule a phone call if it's kind of the right fit. And I hope that most college coaches are getting back. I will say we miss things. It's not, everyone misses some things in their jobs occasionally, and that's just part of life. We try our best to get back to everyone. It doesn't always work out that way, but really certainly do try the best that we possibly can. And then once that phone call happens, that's really a way for us to kind of see and make that personal connection, which I think is an important part of the process. And if it seems like a good fit, maybe we'll get to go on a visit. But that first email, I will say, it's important. Make sure that it's concise, but also express your enthusiasm. Enthusiasm comes across in all different ways, and I think that's important to get across to the coaches.
That's great. So another question that just came through in the Q&A chat: should you reach out to about recruitment to universities that you would like to attend if you know you're not good enough at a good enough squash level to be recruited?
Wait, before you answer, Sean, I'm going to be curious to hear your response because I responded in the chat. So I'll let you go ahead.
I haven't had time to look at the chat, but yes, I do. I think a number of places have a ton of walk-ons, and I think you may be surprised. We generally carry between 4 and 5 walk-ons every year, and different places do that admission cycle differently. And so I'm not going to dive into that, but yeah, reach out. Sometimes our walk-ons end up being captains on our team. They end up developing much more quickly than we anticipate. And so, it really, and I've seen this across the board, and, I just think it varies from coach to coach, but in general, I've seen a ton of walk-ons and a ton of different places have really positive experiences. And I would also encourage you, even if that academic school looks like the right fit for you, you may be able to get both a great academic experience and play in a top 9 position somewhere else. So don't be discouraged if you don't get the right answer there. There are a ton of great schools in the league. And so you may end up, being really surprised. Hey, I ended up going somewhere else and had a great academic experience and ended up playing, on a pretty competitive team. So don't be afraid to, go for it. Why not?
Thanks, Sean. And I have 2 more. One was, as a coach, when you're attending a tournament or watching a prospective student athlete play, what are there any specifics that you're looking for when they're competing? Obviously, if you were just look at a draw, you could see wins or losses, but actually showing up and watching how a player their form, how they move, their fitness level, the way they act on court, and interact with everyone around them, their opponent, referees. Like, what is moving the needle for you as a coach when you're watching them?
Yeah, a lot of nuances in there. I mean, it takes, I think all the college coaches are really experienced. They're really great coaches. A lot of us have played, well, a lot of them have played at higher levels, and so they can see a good squash player pretty quickly. A lot of that goes into it. Movement, taking the ball early. We can get into that, but I will say, watching how you interact, how you warm up. I'm constantly looking to see how you're preparing for your matches. Constantly, I know we all are looking to see how you react under pressure. Is it a big tournament? Is it a big moment? How you handle that? Interactions with your parents, interactions with your racket, perhaps being, some sort of racket abuse situation. We want to make sure, remember, all of our teams are fairly small for college athletic teams. And so having the right fit in what we term our locker room is really, really important. And so sometimes, that may come across the wrong way. And if it becomes a trend, then, I think, then there's going to be some questions. And it doesn't mean it's, eliminating again. It just means that maybe a question that we would ask, in a phone call. Hey, look, when we were at this tournament, we noticed you're having a rough time. Is there something going on that we need to know about, and so on and so forth. And so, we're paying attention to all of that. How you cool down after the match, even if you lose a big match, what are you doing? Like, what's your level of professionalism after the match? And again, that happens, there's varying degrees to that, right? It's not all kind of that intensely watching, but the match is itself, we can see that, and most of us can tell a good squash player pretty quickly. I'm interested in some of the other kind of nuances. Are you listening between games? Who's getting your water for you? Like all of those things, I think play a small role in how we recruit, for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And then last question I had, I loved the question. So I wanted to end with it. But when families are evaluating schools that they would like to consider or play for or are excited about, what would you recommend that they should be looking for beyond kind of the squash component? So effectively, the question is about how can a student athlete or a family go about finding a school that offers the best fit for them?
I think you're really lucky. I think that because you're in the college squash world, you're looking at these kind of high academic, high achieving, really well-known schools. All of them are. And that's a really great place to be in. Almost as you're not kind of shuttled by the paradox of choice here. There's 36 different schools, maybe, Harry, somewhere in that region, 38 different schools. And so in a way, there's a really wide net, but also it's not as big as, say, if you're a football player where you've got 500 schools to choose from. And so you're kind of crippled by that choice. I think also because geographically you can get out there and see them all. I think that's a really good, and then just talk to people. I think this community has tons of connections, and reaching out to people you may know that have a connection there. Don't be afraid to do that. I think that's a really good way to get to know a place as firsthand, in school experience, I think goes a long way. And that's not just talking to an athlete that played a sport there. It's someone who may not have played a sport there. I think there's good information there too. Like, hey, what was the after class schedule like, and what did you guys do? Where did you go? Are there places in town to eat? Like, what's the food scene like? There's all these college towns have got great little nuances to them. And I kind of love on the road going to like a Williamstown and going down to, Charlie Bagels, wherever it is. Like, it's great. Right. And you get to kind of see all these great fun places. I mean, we were in Williamstown last year. They had the holiday fair was going down the street with the fire trucks and everything. And I was like, I wish my kids were with me. It was awesome. But I think just getting on campus to these places is important. And then scheduling phone calls. And if you can't get there, reach out. I think most of us are all pretty accessible people. Go to a camp. We all travel. I just think getting to know it is important.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. And thank you for the time. I know that we ended up, you ended up doing a lot more than you'd initially signed up for, being the sole.
I'm sorry, everyone got stuck with me.
And apologies to everyone that called on. That was a tech issue on our side. But I thought Sean was great. He offered some really, really good information and insight into the process. We really appreciate everyone taking their Thursday evening to share it with us.
Eric, can I just say one more thing quickly? Very quickly. I've got to run to dinner in a minute, but I think there's a lot of angst out there because the rumor mill in the junior world is so strong. I just had a situation come up this year in this cycle that was just demonstrably false, and caused a lot of anxiety. And so what I'm getting at here is, don't always believe everything you hear in the rumor kind of mill. I think that creates a lot more anxiety for a ton of people that doesn't need to be there. And I know this is overwhelming. I know everyone's looking at, this isn't just the 4-year future of my kid, it's the long-term outcome, and I get all of that. I would just be cautious about where you're getting your information from and how much you are, you're really paying attention to it. And ask, if there's something comes up, please ask. Like, ask any of the coaches, hey, I heard this, what do you think? And they may be able to tell you. They may not be able to tell you, the answer to that. But generally, sometimes I've seen the biggest kind of anxiety happen through kind of just information that really isn't valid. And so really ask the questions to the coaches and get the source.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, with that, we know I'm going to hand it back to Lovey in a moment to close things out. But this was a great session. We really thank Sean and to the other coaches who we're trying to call in, and we're ready to be here and answer the questions. But we know how important this is, that there's a lot of appetite out there for information, for resources on this topic, and a lot of great questions that came through the chat tonight and were submitted ahead of time. So that's a great starting point for us to be able to create more resources, to be able to disseminate this information to our community. So thank you all, and certainly hope that you enjoy the process. If you're even just starting it right now, it's a long journey, but it's a fun one, and you should really enjoy the process, get to know people, get to know the coaches and the different schools, and squash at any of our colleges is going to be a rewarding experience. So it's definitely worth it.
Thank you, Harry. And just reiterate, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the beginning of what we have, in the pipeline of more events like this and more information coming to you so that you really know what the process is like. Last few words, I'll just say, keep having fun. Keep remembering why you play squash. The college piece is part of that equation, but the more enjoyment that you have with it, the better you'll do. And we are here to offer any advice, questions that you have. Please feel free to reach out. You have Harry's email address right there. Mine is lovey.roundtree@csasquash.com. We are here to help guide you through this process, and we look forward to seeing you on the junior circuit. Have a great night, everyone.